I had the comment several times in the past, and once again recently, that if I continue doing what I'm doing, I'll hurt myself, and I should get a teacher to keep from hurting myself when I sing. This is another one of the pattern of comments that I've seemed to have seen lately, or talked about more lately, in which I think the comment is about as far from the truth as one can possibly get. There are situations in which listening to a coach would not be likely to damage me as I see it, such as on YouTube. In that situation, the coach has to make a favorable first impression, and it's a buyer's market. I'm in control of who I take instruction from or try to learn something from. And there are a lot of people competing for my potential business as a customer, or anyone else's for that matter. In other situations that people might have when growing up, when they're exposed to vocal teachers, that's not the case. There's often a potential for abuse of power. And in that case, it would be like a rider pushing a horse to go faster. The rider can, in symbolizing the coach in this case, can push someone beyond what they would normally consider safe limits. And the equivalent of riding a horse till it drops dead under you. So people will do things under the power of an instructor that they wouldn't think of doing otherwise, and which can be injurious. And these are the worst horror stories you can hear, or at least some of them, from anyone, even vocal coaches themselves. You ask what's the worst story they know of somebody having vocal tearing or being physically injured in some way because during the course of learning to sing, and they'll say it was under the influence of a vocal teacher. There's several instances of this. I read a book on how to learn to sing, and the woman writing it described how she was incapacitated essentially for 2 years because of the influence of a certain teacher. She just kept getting worse and worse and worse, and took a long time to get her back to where she had been just by teaching herself. There are things like classes. This is one, academic environment. The singer has to sing a certain way to get a good grade, and may be pushed in an unhealthy direction by being in that environment. Or a singer may have to be pressured to sing in a certain way in order to be a member of a group or join a band. Or the singer might have to sing a certain way in order to win a contest that's judged by a vocal coach. In these cases, there's a tendency to push somebody under high pressure in a situation where they're more likely to injure themselves because the person giving the instruction or the passive approval of a certain method of singing doesn't really know very much about the person who is potentially about to be injured, and might try to appear wiser and have more information than they really have in order to get business. This is fundamental in a lot of ways because singing is not something that people usually have the equipment to evaluate in terms of potential injury. We don't have the endoscopes made available to us cheaply and in a widely distributed fashion, which ought to be possible in these days of cheap digital cameras and so on, in order to really see if there are nodules developing or inflammation developing in the vocal folds. The presumption of this knowledge then is a big risk when somebody's looking for business, and when their business in large measure depends upon injury. Teachers, doctors, vocal specialists who eventually look down your throat if you get past all the other hoops and wait in line long enough to get processed by the system, are all one way or another in the business of injury. If nobody gets injured, they don't have any business. And this is the thing that I see people trying to direct me toward when they say things like, "You're going to hurt yourself, go get a coach." Or I think this is the greatest danger, the thing most likely to cause injury. Now, the recommendations when they see this are misdirected also, in that I hurt myself all the time. I sing notes that hurt. In fact, almost all of them have hurt me at one time or another. Sometimes I've had to endure soreness to get used to singing in a certain way, like head voice or chest voice in normal baritone range. People have told me that I sound the best, and I'm doing the things that hurt me the most when they sound that way. There's this disconnection, and people will think that if something hurts them to listen to it, it must hurt me to produce it. And that's not true. A lot of the better sounding notes I produced, natural or relaxed sounding, were actually painful for me to do. The notes that people complain about, say I'm going to hurt myself doing, are probably the least pain-inducing ones. They require effort. I show strain on my face doing them, but I don't know of any time I've really hurt myself doing those notes, as opposed to all the others. There are plenty of pitches and techniques that people could say, you'll hurt yourself doing that, and I'd say, yes, you're absolutely right. I'd do it for only a couple of notes a day, and I consider it risky. There's a problem also in that assuming that everything wrong with your voice can be fixed by a teacher. There are many influences in society, I think, that keep people from developing their voices fully. All sorts of things in someone's life can show up in the voice, from throat cancer to heart attack to, I think, just general feeling oppressed and beaten down by society. And in some ways, these influences, the psychological ones, are so widespread that we don't have a means of telling that we're under them. We can't come out from under the influence and see, oh, my voice is much better now, because it's there all the time. They're so pervasive, and these are not things that a vocal teacher can help you with. It's like death and taxes. If your feeling of oppression is caused by taxes, it's not something that the vocal teacher can help you with. You got to get out there and fight with other people to have a less oppressive society. One of the things I've been told about as a student when I was very young is that the more repressive a regime is, the greater status and pay teachers receive. Teaching is something that's very important to keeping people under control in a repressive society. In fact, the very notion of teaching as we know it, according to one video that I'll leave a reference to in the description, is a myth. Teaching as we know it, according to this man, doesn't exist. And although I might not state it quite that strongly myself, I do think that particularly with flute and whistle register, there's not a lot that someone else can do to develop that. It's like diets. There's so many tutorials on how to do whistle register, and maybe they worked for that one person, but I don't know if the techniques are that transferable. I haven't found anything by a vocal teacher that's made me more able to do flute or whistle voice than I was before. I have found a helpful tip, and which I've mentioned in other videos, from a commenter on one of the videos done by a vocal teacher. But it was the commenter who helped me, gave me the idea and started me on that path, not the teacher. So there are a lot of misconceptions involved with teaching, and I would consider, I'll see if I can find a reference and leave this, but there's a lot of teachers selling their services based on the fear of injury and citing horror stories from other teachers who caused them the injury. But in order to do that, there must be a case, or several cases, where the greatest danger is the teachers themselves.